5 or less, you'll feel it like it's nothing.
It'll be like a breeze.
It's like a breeze.
Whenever you're ready.
All right. Okay, so I'm gonna just get started right now. So welcome everybody and good morning. Thank you for being here today, for the ones that I have here present, also for the family and friends that I know that I have overseas watching this. My name, for those of you that don't know me, Alvaro Aguado, and my dissertation is called Beyond Words, and it's a multimodal framework to process text, images in the space of online reviews. This work is the culmination of many years of work, and as one of my good friends told me, this is the most expensive book I will ever buy. And I'm sure that it is something that I'm sure that you will find it interesting. I want to thank the committee and my advisors, Jorge and Chelsea, for all your great input. I think that the rigorousness of this work is better. The material to really advance the academic work is a lot better. So really thank you for all the contributions and what we have here today. As with any good book, I think we should probably start from the beginning, even though you probably know some of this information, but it's important to set the ground. So first, I want to describe what are online reviews and what is helpfulness, because it's the key concept that we're going to be covering. Online reviews are a form of electronic word of mouth. This is a peer-to-peer communication between individuals to evaluate products or services. The difference between a regular word of mouth is that electronic word of mouth is asynchronous, meaning that you can have somebody say an information and you can see it at a later time. And information on online reviews is important because it really helps you diagnose and make decisions on a purchase. Information from Bright Local Survey, for example, shows in 2024 that 75% of people, they look always or regularly at reviews whenever they're making purchases. And what I found more striking is that 50% of people consider this type of information from online reviews as important from recommendations from friends and family. So a review is going to be as important as their level of diagnosticity, meaning the reduction of the uncertainty when you want to make a purchase decision. So when we measure helpfulness, is this value of reducing the uncertainty to make a final purchase. Nowadays, a lot of the platforms allow you to interact directly with the online review to show if you find the information helpful. One of the things that we're going to be covering all the time is multimodality. This refers to the ability for a review to convey information in different formats. So for example, text, images, metadata, ratings. This is what we talk about multimodality. I think I skipped. One of the things that we're going to be covering, let's see if I can stay. One of the things that we're going to be covering in this dissertation is mainly focusing on a type of products that are called experience products. Experience products are those products whose attributes you cannot really measure them before making the purchase, meaning before experiencing the product. They are different from search products. So you can think of a search product as any product that you can measure their attributes. These are electronics, this is furniture, anything that you're going to buy, that you can decompose them into attributes and you can know what to expect. So for example, a camera is going to have a level of megapixels, a lens that has a specific focus, so you can understand the level of quality that you're going to have. With experience product, this is a little bit more nuanced or more complicated. You could find this in, for example, hotels, healthcare products, or hotels, where the attributes not always means that you're going to understand what the experience is going to be. So not until you really have experience that you know how is it going to feel. So this makes the effect of helpfulness a lot more relevant for experience products compared to search products, as you rely more on the voice of other people to reduce your uncertainty. And also because the information could be context dependent, something that might be useful for one person may not be for another person. So more megapixels is better for a camera. For a hotel that is good for kids might be great for some people. For others, it might be a nightmare to go to a hotel that is going to have everything about kids. Additionally, one thing that we're going to focus on in the hotel space is that there's a lot more variety in the information that we're going to see from visuals. This makes it a lot more challenging to process because it's not just showcasing a product. You could showcase many different scenes, many different aspects of the experience that you're going to have. With this, now that we have laid out the definition, I would like to explain a little bit how the research, academic research, has gone through this type of information. So how quantitative analysis has normally processed helpfulness in terms of online reviews. The schematic shows the following. You can divide them as a regular data science project where you have helpfulness, the variable of interest that you really want to measure, which could be measured through that direct way with the thumbs up button, through a semantic analysis, which is more indirect, through a survey analysis, so people referring if they found information helpful or not. And you can then decompose what are the features of the review. Most of the analysis of the work has focused on textual elements. This is because it was more prominent back in the day when the technology was more limited into showing images, as HTML5 only has 10 years. And we know a lot about how textual elements really contribute to this body of work. With visuals, we're a little bit more limited in our understanding. Once you have that, you can combine them to try to understand, predict what is going to be the total amount of helpfulness votes or the ratio of helpfulness, or separate what is helpful from unhelpful. With this schematic in mind, we can actually do the following. This dissertation already finds that there's some big gaps, major questions that we could be answering given that this is the regular schematic. Number one is that because visual elements are not as deeply understood as textual elements, we don't really know how to convey how that information is processed in the cognitive process that people do, and we don't know the interaction that they really have with textual elements. So that synergistic interaction is something that we're still have limited understanding of how it works. The second thing is because we're focusing all the time on user-generated content, nowadays, businesses can also post information, and they're going to be coexisting with user-generated content at the same time. This means that postings from businesses, even though they may not have a commercial intent, or they could have a commercial intent, are competing for attention with users, which in the end shows how is helpfulness applied to business-generated context. And the last one is because, I don't know if the people present here has ever interacted with these buttons of helpfulness. If you only focus on the average counts or the separation between helpfulness from unhelpfulness, you could lay out that there are some set of reviews that are extremely helpful or that they show up more prominently in websites. And we don't really understand what is driving them because the body of the research is going to focus more on separating the modality, meaning like the average counts of the model. With these three major gaps in mind, this dissertation is focused trying to address them in a progressive way. We have 3 chapters that are going to be elaborating on this problem. First, we're going to lay out the foundation of how do we process text and images? How can we create a framework that is going to analyze this type of information in online reviews? And once we have that, we are going to apply this to the problem of business-generated content in chapter 3 and in chapter 4 for the extension on how tail products, how tail helpfulness works. I want to tell the committee as well that even though we're not talking a lot about this today, but we are also contributing to the body of work in this research by having collected a custom extracted multimodal data set that is extremely large. We have 800,000 reviews and more than 400,000 images that not only contribute to the work that we have here today, but it could contribute to future areas of research and, extending more on analysis, not only on online reviews, but maybe on multimodality analysis. With this, I would like to now talk a little bit about, before jumping into the chapters, into what is the backbone, the theoretical backbone that we're using to explain how people make decisions, how they find helpfulness in making the decisions through online reviews. The elaboration likelihood model is a dual process that was created by Petty and Casiopo in the 70s, and it has been used a lot, even in the most recent research in online reviews. It basically states that people make or create their attitudes based on 2 routes of collecting information. One is the central route and one is the peripheral route. The usage of one versus the other depends on the level of engagement, or in this case, they call it the level of elaboration. Elaboration means that the product that you're trying to research for really matters to you because you perceive that there's a risk in making that purchase. So if I want to go at a hotel that is very expensive, I'm going to make sure that the information that I capture, it is I understand it very well. I know the pros and cons of going to this place compared to a purchase that might be more trivial. I'm going to go to a cheap or a budget hotel. For that, I just need to know if it's good enough. So central route is going to try to convey the information of the content, the informativeness, and the persuasion aspects of the reviews, where the peripheral route is going to be more on not understanding so much the content, instead understanding who's saying what is being said. Do I trust the source? Do I look at the outcome? And from that, we're really making that attitude formation. What is the decision that we're making at the end? The weighting that you put in each one of them depends on that level of involvement. You don't need to precisely have just central route or just peripheral route. It's a weighting that you put on your cognitive process. Now that we have full understanding, we can deep into what is the application? How can we apply this framework into the text-image elaboration framework? I know that there's a lot of information here, but I really want to keep the committee and the attendance focus on what is the main problem. Historically, as I said, a lot of the body of work was focused on textual elements. So textual elements, we know a lot more about how are they conveying information and what are the mappings to cognitive processes that are being laid out in our consumer. So for example, when we look at the length, there's a great body of work that talks about how people are putting that knowledge and they're assessing that knowledge in total because they have more information to make a decision. This happens with a lot of other aspects. So for example, with the richness, the argumentation, but with images, even though we're controlling for them, we know that they convey some sort of information. We don't know exactly what cognitive processes are happening. So the question then becomes, if we think that images convey information and that we're processing them the same way that we're processing elements as text, do they have some cognitive process as part of the evaluation of this information? And if so, can we map them to those cognitive processes the same way that we're doing with text? So that's the question that we really need to answer. We know, for example, that images are more salient than text. So our gaze really goes to the images before they go to the text, because as humans, we're more attracted to visuals than we are attracted to text. On the other hand, text is more causes more cognitive attention, meaning that we put more attention when we're reading it compared to the amount of cognitive effort that we're putting on images, right? So then the question is, okay, if the information may not be exactly the same because people are processing in a different way, could it be that there's some synergistic effect between text and images? And are there some redundancies in the effects that they're producing? This type of questions is what we really want to answer with this model. So what we have done is gone from the theoretical aspect into the conversion using the elaboration likelihood model into what we have here that is called the text-image elaboration likelihood model. It's an extension of the elaboration likelihood model. What we're trying to do is really extend the subcategories of pieces of information, mapping the cognitive processes. We're trying to provide text and images on parallel sites using research from psychology and from marketing to try to understand, are these types of information comparable? Can we really use them in this particular category of information? Last time during the proposal, we talked about the new contributions that we're doing with image entropy, for example, but we're really bringing in a body of work from the past 15 years to create this model. I want to tell the committee, because from the last time that we saw this information, there has been 3 changes that we've made that are probably worth noting. 2 of them are just an extension because we were using it just in one chapter and we're applying it everywhere because otherwise it wouldn't be a framework. And then the other one is a new, we're replacing the old variable that we had on readability for text-sidedness. Let me start with that one first. So what is text-sidedness? This talks about the quality of the review, and it's a textual element. That means when it's one-sided, it provides just either pros or cons about the review, meaning that if someone is saying, I love this place, this hotel was the best, I'm only elaborating on a positive side. That is a more one-sided way of argumenting how do I found the specific hotel or the product or service. Whereas a two-sided review will contain pros and cons. From a user perspective, they find two-sided reviews to be more objective, more credible, more balanced. And this is actually different from social media, where people really want to find more expressive content, so really more biased toward one way or the other. But because the objective is to make a purchase decision, in the case of online reviews, two-sided reviews are more salient when they are provided in a more balanced way. The way that we operationalize it is the same that previous research has done. We map what is called cognitive markers, which are words that signal that the sentence is going to go in an opposite direction. So if I'm saying that I love this hotel, it's very clean, but I found that the parkings are very small. That but is really providing that there's going to be a counter argument, something that is going to change the direction of pros or cons. The more markers a review has, the more two-sided it is. The second thing that I want to talk about is content neutrality. We discussed this on chapter 3, but we're also bringing it back to chapter 2, because the effective messaging is something that we know from commercial intents that has been around for a long time. So companies are trying to really convey an emotional communication to make sure that that really evokes arousal and more effective responses. So those commercial communications translate here. If somebody is making a communication that is very emotional, are we going to get a reaction that is more engaging? In the case of textual elements, this is actually negative. The fact that we're putting something that is extremely sentimental, it is viewed as not, again, balanced or objective. This is the best place in the world. I cannot go to any other place. It's the best experience I had in my life. It could be providing that the person is extremely biased towards one side, and they could be adorning the recommendation. In images, it's actually different. With images, that's an experience evidence of what is happening. We trust that the picture is showing that there's a bed. We trust that there's a swimming pool in the information that we're seeing. So the fact that you have more information that is showing good things is actually going to be reacting with a positive tone. The way that we operationalize it is we use a convolutional neural network of pre-trained information to understand what is called pixel mappings. So we can really understand if there's a cup of coffee that is with good lining, that's normally related to positive sentiment. And that way we can really understand if the images that are being shown are emotionally charged or more neutrally charged or negatively charged. Important to mention, we're not trying to find if something is positive or negative. We're trying to find if it's emotionally charged or neutral, okay? And the last thing just to mention is because before we were not really including the post age, and this was a miss. We were using it in other chapters, but not in chapter 2. When you go to a website such as hotels, the algorithms are going to prioritize information that it has been there for a longer time or has more helpfulness. So as a result, there's going to be a bias in the type of information that you see. Helpfulness is a function of the visibility, meaning that if I have more chances of clicking that I find something helpful, there's a higher likelihood that I could click. So as a result, if we don't control for this, there could be a misattribution of helpfulness by not really including this variable. So we include timing as a variable that is going to take into account the effect over time. Of course, the information here hides. So there's another thing that is important that I want to discuss, and is during the proposal, we talked about either using a zero-inflated regression versus a negative binomial. And we've been going into this topic deeply to try to understand what is the best way to go. And we netted out in using negative binomial with some additions that I'm going to talk about. And the reason is because it is more aligned with the literature. So a greater body of research is using negative binomial. And it's probably because it's more simple to understand. Zero-inflated regression basically has a two process where you're trying to generate zeros versus the regular distribution. And this requires that we need to have a psychological process to map those zeros from a theoretical perspective. So it's more parsimonious to try to understand the psychological entity from this point of view of using negative binomial, and it's more supported by previous research. Additionally, because zero-inflated is a mixture type of model, does not have some of the benefits of having marginal effects. The log likelihood has to be regressed in a different way. It's not a direct decomposition because negative binomial can be derived from the GLM type of model, the general linear models. Even if you say, okay, but could it be better fitting? When we do the testing, we find that there's no excess zeros when we're fitting with negative binomial, and that the effects on over dispersion on that tail of reviews is really the same for zero-inflated versus a negative binomial. So there's no true benefit of going into that from a methodological perspective. One more thing that I want to mention is that the variance was another thing that when you calculate it could be a problem, because negative binomial is going to use the homoscedasticity of the model itself. But if you have a distribution that is very long in the tail, then your variance is going to be misattributed, or it's going to be miscalculated. So following the recommendation from you, Professor Cabrera, we use a more following the package of two-part. We didn't use the package, but we used the same information, the way that is being calculated, to have a more robust variance calculation of the beta. So in this case, we're using the Pearson deviation or the residual to recalculate the variance in the sandwich formulation. The image on Daleks is not showing up, so apologies. I don't know why it's not showing on the computer today. Thanks of the live. But this was something that it was recommended by Professor Chelsea to explain, because some of the learnings that we're going to apply in the final model use Daleks for model importance. The way that we really collect that the variables are important or not important is by using a methodology that has been used before in this space, which is the model agnostic framework for Daleks. What it does is we fit the full model using the regular negative binomial, and then we remove one of the variables in multiple ways. We shuffle the variables that we're taking out, and we look at the performance. Those variables that consistently provide the most effect in the final performance are more important, because they're not really conveying the same type of information as some other variable. So that is the way that we're going to convey if a variable is truly important, to try to explain helpfulness. With that, I can jump into the findings of this particular model, which there is a lot of learnings, but I would like to focus on three big aspects that I found from this first research. Number one is that images really convey information that text does not convey. This means that the variables related to images have significant coefficients. They're not collinear whatsoever to textual elements, and they make the model better fitting. So as a result, you could infer that images are important in order to make decisions to find something helpful or unhelpful. So images really matter. The second thing is that those images don't work in the same way as text, meaning there's no synergistic effect between text and visual elements. We as humans don't process the information as a whole. We're not seeing, for example, the information content in the image, and we're putting it together with the textual elements. Instead, we're processing separately. The only exception is the quality. If you find that the research or the review is put in a very good argumentation and is put in with good quality of the visual, you can then find that that effect is taken as a whole. So there's some synergistic effect there to be taken. We also find that all the elements of the text-image elaboration likelihood model are significant. That means that all the processes that we have created have a significant effect on the final end. And for example, information entropy, which is something that we're generating new, it is salient, it is having an effect on the final information. And it's even when we aggregate on using Daleks, we see that has even more effect than text entropy. This could be driven by the fact that images are more densely packed with information than text. So it could be that it's conveying more information. The last thing I want to provide that is important from this outcome is that the first thing that is the most important, if I aggregate all the elements into the categories, the big elements that we're creating, the context is the most important thing. So that the hotel that I want to go to or the product that I'm going to be buying. But after that, if I look at the content, persuasion is more important than credibility, and credibility is more important than informativeness. So contrary to one will believe, the information is not the most important thing that people look at when they're trying information that is helpful. This is important because we will see how it's different from business-generated content. So persuasion is greater than credibility, greater than informativeness. Okay, so now that we have laid out the foundation, we're going to see how the effect of this type of model works on business-generated content. So how businesses compete for this type of information. There is very little research on applications directly to online reviews helpfulness from businesses, probably because it's not something that it has shown up until more recently. So when we were coming into this part of research, we wanted to really set a good foundation of what do we wanted to learn. So we set up three main questions that we wanted to put up front and answer with this first with this research. The first thing is, what makes a visual, or in this case, a posting from a business-generated content helpful? Is it different from when users post information? Do we see it with the same eyes and we make the same cognitive processes when we're processing this type of information? The second question will be building on that. If there is a process that is congruent with the way that user-generated content works, are there differences between the two? Can we learn if there's effects that affect more one group than the other? And if that is the case, can businesses do something to improve the way that they're posting information so that they're reaching more audience, they're reaching better effects from the users? In order to do this, we need to really delve into how business-generated content, so how business communications are being seen by users, right? How users really look at communication. And of course, this goes back to the marketing literature, where the main thing that we find, and is very congruent for many, many years, is that business-generated content is considered less trustworthy, or is less impactful because there's a commercial intent. This is because when we see a communication from a business, we engage in what is called persuasion copying mechanisms. This is when I see that somebody is trying to persuade me with a message that could be to, for the betterment of themselves. I look at the information with a skepticism. I have a critical eye to try to identify what are those elements that they're doing to try to persuade me. And I'm going to really flip the effect on themselves. So whenever I'm seeing something that is extremely good looking, I'm going to try to make them look in the other way, or look at it in a more negative light. With this, the question is, okay, if the information is if people are more skeptical, is there something that businesses can do to improve or lower this level of skepticism? And some of the things that have been shown is that when there's a good alignment between what the users are talking about the company and what the company is saying about themselves is the same, so there's not incongruencies, they're more similar, that reduces skepticism. The typical example is when a company shows testimonials, right? This is what people are talking about ourselves. This is the way that they're saying that we are being presented. When businesses use this, it's a way to reduce the level of skepticism. The other thing that companies can do is really trying to show that they have a brand identity or a brand equity that reflects that they're being a trustworthy entity, or that they're a good entity that they can trust. With those two elements, the question then becomes, is there a spillover effect? Meaning, when people see the information more credible, are the rest of the messages and the communication changing again, and they're seeing in a better light, as we do with user-generated content? And this is the main idea of how we're building our framework with the changes for this particular method. So the variables that we have in our framework are the same. The only thing that we're changing in this case is changing how credibility is viewed. So instead of, for example, showing how we were showing before, credibility was the number of posts that a user was creating, how many times was an author creating, that doesn't really matter for a company. For a company, it doesn't matter if they're making 1,000 posts, 1 million posts, they don't make them more credible because they have an intent to fulfill. So instead, what we're changing is having two variables on credibility that are related to the similarity between user-generated content and business-generated content, and also that brand identity or the brand equity that we're generating. There's one more change I need to mention, and it's because the total review rating is no longer the deviation here, because the companies don't post a rating about themselves. So you cannot really look at the deviation of my own post. They can just rely on the total perception of rating that the whole hotel has. So let's look at how are we looking at this credibility? How are we operationalize it? The way that we looked at this problem was thinking about how people think that they're being persuaded. How are they being deceived? And according to the literature, there's two ways that a company can really provide a decisive information when they're posting, or a communication that is really trying to lie about themselves. They can either enhance the images or the content that they're posting, or they can cherry pick, they can selectively choose what to show in a more better light. That is, better angles of the pictures, only places that are good looking, specific rooms. So we need to try to understand if there's a way that we can see if this type of strategies are being followed or if they're not being followed. To do that, what we have created is a way to compare the decomposition of images into what is called HSV histogram decomposition. This is the same way that humans look at the light. Instead of RGB, which is the typical you will see on your TV, that is like the amount of red, blue, and green. In this case, HSV is related more to the hue, the saturation, and the value of the color, and is more related to the way that we comprehend light. If the images from users are closely related to business-generated content, then there's going to be a more similarity between the two. So the average picture of the business will look similar to the way that users are posting the information about the hotel. Now, if we're able to automatically measure this, we could do an experiment, right? We could try to understand if the strategy that businesses are currently following, is it a good strategy, or are they actually shooting themselves in the foot? Are they actually hurting themselves by just posting a specific content that it may not be related to user-generated content? They could be knowingly or unknowingly doing this, but it could be a good guidance for them to understand this is the way that you should be posting content. So what we do is a quasi-lift experiment, which basically looks at, let's look at a point in time where users have posted their information, and then let's look when you post information from a business-generated content. We measure that similarity, and then as time goes by, we see if the new pictures that businesses are presenting, are they making that similarity go closer or farther away from users? And then we can correlate that action, that strategy, with helpfulness of getting more positive or getting more negative. If the relationship works, that means that there's a better strategy to gain engagement and to gain credibility from posting this type of information. With this, we have the findings, and we want to really organize them by the research questions that we had at hand. So we were saying first, what are the drivers of helpfulness? What makes a business-generated content to be helpful? What we can say from the results that we found is that the text-image elaboration likelihood model fits well the narrative of business-generated content, as the model has significance for all the drivers, and we find that the variables followed as a pattern that we expect compared to the user-generated content. It's a very important point to understand that this business-generated content similarity to user-generated content is a key piece in this model. So the more similar, the more credible the company is, the more helpfulness it gets. And not only that, it really has a moderating effect on the rest of the communication. One thing that we found interesting is that some variables that are related to the persuasion are flipping the sign in terms of how it's being perceived. So before, the aesthetic quality of the image was very important. Here is seen as actually as a negative impact. So if I'm presented with an image that is very good looking or very aesthetically pleasing, I'm going to see it using this persuasion copying mechanisms in a more negative way. So we see this as the main effects, that those elements that in user-generated content was negative or was positive, in this case, they're negative. Interestingly, when you incorporate this credibility interaction, the sign flips to positive again. So they're now seeing back the same way that you will perceive a user-generated content, which is very interesting because it basically means that businesses can be trusted or can be seen in a more favorable light if they're considered to be trustworthy, if they're a credible source of information, if they're not trying to deceive their audience. There's one variable, however, that is not impacted by the credibility aspect, and it's probably important because it's something that businesses can do from the beginning, and that is the informational depth. That is the information that is contained within the image that showcases what are the objects that I have within them. There's no interaction with the credibility, and this is because back to the experiential evidence that we find in images. If I see a chair, yes, I could believe that that information, that chair could be better or worse looking, but it doesn't mean that that chair does not exist. Or if they have a swimming pool, they have a swimming pool. It is rare that I'm not going to believe that that information is going to be real. And the last thing that is probably important to mention is how this translates into managerial strategies. When we did this quasi-uplift experiment, we found that indeed a strategy of following what the user says is the best strategy that you can follow. So the user sets the narrative, the business should follow. It's the same way of saying I cannot really communicate information that people don't think about myself. I cannot showcase a picture of something that is not real about me. And this is seen in this experiment where we're finding that user-generated content sets the narrative. The second thing is related to that informativeness aspect. Instead of having persuasion be more important than credibility and informativeness, in business-generated content, informativeness is more important. This means that when users are looking at the information generated by businesses, probably again related to that critical eye that they have on business communication and disclosures, they're going to be looking more for information rather than looking at what are the aspects that make the message more persuasive. So with this, we have apply the information on a new set of reviews. Last thing to do is try to understand what makes a review extremely helpful. So how can a review be understood on those tail cases, those cases that are more rare, but that they really mean also something for the user. The problem is the following. If I have a data set that is extremely skewed towards a modality, meaning a level which is going to have the highest proportion of the total elements, the models are going to train themselves extremely biased. So they're going to try to focus on that, separating the information from that modality argument. We find that on helpfulness in particular, there's a higher skewness towards 0 because I don't know if you have ever done it, but it is rare that people will engage on clicking on thumbs up vote most of the time. So the model is going to try to train themselves and try to separate those zeros from lower counts. And it's going to do this at the sacrificing on the tail end side. Of course, there could be machine learning algorithms that are trying to fit the whole system, but still for a model, it's going to try to sacrifice that as much as possible to get the best performance possible, not miss on those lower counts. But this is actually important. Understanding if a review is getting 150, upvotes is really helpful. And for a platform that is trying to get more engagement, such as TripAdvisor, they would like to know why something goes all of a sudden viral. And it is very interesting that this type of information has not been applied in the hospitality segment yet. So we need to go into another field, which is social media, that has a lot of knowledge about how virality works, to understand how there are types of reviews that really go viral. If we look at this type of literature, we find that social media decomposes the effects of virality into 3 main dimensions. The first one being the content impact. That means that when a post causes arousal, it's really novel or is driving some social cue that is relevant for people engage more and they share it more. This is if something that I'm reading is funny, if something that I'm reading is shocking, it's really arousing my attention, that is more likely to be shared. In online reviews, this does not work in the same way, as I don't want to be shocked or I don't want to find something funny. I'm trying to make a decision. But the same elements that we were looking into the content of the review still apply. Informativeness, persuasion, and credibility are those aspects that we're measuring to understand if someone is going to engage with the content. The second thing that social media looks at is the contextual influence. This is understanding if there's a trending topic on a given platform. So if on TikTok, there's a specific dance that people are doing that is causing a lot more action or engagement, there's going to be more shareability. Whereas if you put that same type of trending topic on a platform like X or Twitter, it may not have the same traction. Why is that? This is because the target audience in which each one of them is set is different. So the audience might be younger on a TikTok platform, whereas on X, it might be more, it might be older skewed compared to that platform. In online reviews, even though you can look at different platforms, such as looking at TripAdvisor versus Trulia versus some other online review website versus Amazon, the reality is that a review that I'm seeing about Hotel A in California is not going to apply, or I'm not going to share it on Hotel B in New York. They don't really share the same space. So a platform, in this case, can be seen as the hotel, the platform where I'm going to be seeing the information. Also, it's important here to mention that the people that are going to be seeing specific hotels, they might represent different target populations, the same way that we were seeing in social media, as people that go to a very expensive hotel may not be target younger compared to a more budget hotels where you may have more younger audiences. The last thing to mention is visibility, right? The content on online reviews, especially on electronic word of mouth, is amplified by platform algorithms. So if something is really trending, it's going to be shared more by the algorithm that is showing on your feed. Also, if the person that is sharing has a big network of people that they can share with, the level of the degree, the density of that graph is going to be higher. And as a result, it's going to really follow a lot more shareability. On online reviews, you don't do this. You don't apply networks. However, the algorithms also play a role in terms of amplifying the information. So they're going to show the information that is more helpful first, or the information that is more relevant. And that is going to generate what is called snowball effect. So the more that is seen, the more that it could be clicked as positive, and the more that it can really generate more engagement. So now that we've seen the comparison between social media and online reviews, we can try to adapt the framework that we have generated compared to those three dimensions of content, context, and visibility. When we do this, we see that there's a clear connection between the central and peripheral route elements, the contextual elements that we're using as control for the type of hotel, and the visibility, which is the time, which is driven by those algorithms that are being driven. We ask 4 questions in this case to understand how virality affects this model in online reviews. We ask first, if the information that we're seeing, that we saw in the chapter 2 regarding the effects of informativeness, persuasion, and credibility are in the same way that we're seeing it, how do they vary as I get to more extreme cases of helpfulness? Does it have a different way of showing the data, or does it show the information in a way that is different? Do they follow a regular path? Meaning, if quality is something that is very important to separate low counts of helpfulness, does it get even bigger as I get closer to extreme cases of helpfulness? So is it the most important thing to go make something go viral? This is the hypothesis that we have first on that number 1 on the left-hand side. The second thing is, if context really matters, the platforms are going to make differences into what something makes go viral. We need to try to separate the information of the hotels between the low, high, and extreme levels of helpfulness by hotel type. So we need to a way to separate hotels as a way to have different target audiences. And the last thing is understanding the relevance and the visibility. Relevance and visibility in online reviews is because you could be looking for information that is relevant at a point in time. So for example, when COVID was very important in 2001 or 2021, a lot of people were really looking for information that was important to understand if there were COVID-related issues. Nowadays, if you see those type of reviews, they're less important because they're no longer relevant. Same thing happens with the seasonality. If I'm going to a resort during the summertime, I may want to understand if they have some sort of activities during the summertime or during the wintertime. They're more relevant for my purchase. So seasonality and relevancy in terms of time, it is an important driver that we need to understand if they really play a part. So what we're saying here is we're separating the time into the year and also the quarter or the season in which it's being treated. How are we going to convey this? Because, okay, we have the information, but now we still have the same problem. 95% of the reviews are between 0 to 2 count reviews. So how can we follow an approach that is going to help us solve for this problem? So we have used, similar to other social media approaches in virality, we have broken the problem into a layer approach. This is the method is called cluster then model approach, where you're basically trying to separate all the different levels of information that could be levels of impact, and then model across all the different pieces to understand if you're finding some patterns that tell you, okay, this is driving virality in this particular context, and this is driving virality in this other context. Let me walk you through, because in the proposal, we didn't really analyze this. The first thing is to cluster based on the hotel characteristics. This means we need to try to understand if there are audiences, there are differences in the different hotels. We try different things, and we found that also in the literature, the way that hotels in hospitality tend to be grouped to find different levels of targets is by the price, the amount of popularity, which is, how many reviews does it have, or the rating, how popular or how well perceived is by consumers. With this, we can try to find different groups of hotels. We try using demographics, but it didn't really find a demographics, meaning like the geography where it's actually placed, but we didn't find like specific effects that were different, and they were not congruent with some of the body of research in clustering the information for hotels. Once you have those clusters, you can now empirically define what is your threshold for what you define as a low count of helpfulness, a high count of helpfulness, and an extreme count of helpfulness. We do this empirically because there's no evidence, or there's no a way of thresholding them that has been shown before in the space. So we're using the same approach as social media, using the empirical evidence to define what are those thresholds mean. Once you have those, you have different data sets. There are subsets of different levels of helpfulness and different types of hotels. We can now regress across all these different models to understand if the coefficients are different, if the threshold of what is deemed helpful is different, and if what is the most important element in the regression varies. So you're going to have a sort of quantile regression, but applied to count data to a Poisson process. And this way, we will be able to see a model that is fitting better and better closer to the tail of the information. So the model will be doing a better and better job to define those tail elements. When we do this, we find the following, that contextual elements do make a difference. So it's not the same to have extreme helpfulness on a hotel that is a lower tier hotel in terms of price, rating, and popularity, because there's less people that are going to be seeing the content. So it's expected to see that there's going to be differences in the thresholds, and we find them that they're significant from a statistical point of view. So when we use the ANOVA differentiation, we find that those differences are really true. We find that even more, there is these clusters are actually working in a progressive fashion, meaning that lower number of reviews, lower number of ratings, and lower price are more correlated, and they have lower level of counts compared to those hotels that have higher number of reviews, higher number of price, and higher popularity. So in the end, there's segments of hotels that we can follow, and this really make a difference. The second thing that I want to answer is because I came here promising that I want to understand what makes something go viral and what makes something to go extreme. The key is to have visibility. So those visibility elements are consistent across the board. They show up in low hotels, high hotels, and extreme hotels. In low counts, high counts, and extreme counts of helpfulness. However, if you look at those cases of hotels that are like on the high end, that they're more pricey, that they're more expensive, people stop looking at those visibility elements in terms of time, and they care more about the argumentation, and they care more about the information that is contained within them. The main idea or the suggestion of what is this happening is because as we are engaging in a more perceived risk effect, we want to really understand the information. We don't care so much about something that is the visibility or the time in which is done. The hotel in itself is very popular, so I know what I'm probably getting from going to the hotel. I need to really understand what is the type of experience that I'm going to have, because I'm facing a more expensive type of product. So there's a difference between high-end hotels versus the other type of hotels. And the other thing that is important is that the author makes a difference in this case. So those reviewers that are more popular or they're more influencers, they tend to reach faster, the higher levels of virality. And it's probably because also following the same algorithms that the platforms have, right? So those reviewers that have a higher level of experience, they're probably going to be showcased more or prioritized by the algorithm in the platform. Last thing I want to mention is that the trends or the coefficients change over time. And this is important because it might seem trivial, but it's not. What we found at the beginning that, for example, image quality or the aesthetic quality, it was a very important element of the review. It does not matter as much as you get to more extreme cases. So to put it in plain English, if you want to really get some helpfulness out of the review, you need to make sure that at least you have quality in your image, but it's not going to cut it to make it extremely viral. You're not going to get to extreme virality by doing that. So following these ideas, we're really going to find that you're going to have a higher level of probability of going viral if you have visibility, and depending on the type of hotel, the strategy that you need to follow. I'm done. I'm going to just talk about my concluding remarks to wrap up what we said through this presentation. So thank you for bearing with me. I think that this work really contributes in three different aspects of the academic research. For once, there's an academic contribution, theoretical contribution, because we're able now to find a model that takes multimodal elements to predict the fitness of the helpfulness of the reviews. And we're able to apply this on user-generated content, but also in business-generated content, which is a different setting. We're also providing a large-scale multimodal data set that is new, that is not provided in the literature before, that could be used for further research. we're creating also new algorithms that allows us to process images and map them to specific cognitive processes, which was not done before in all of the cases, but in some of them, we're coming up with new processes on our own. And lastly, we're applying this to real world data. We found, for example, from an empirical point of view, that images really matter. We came into this research, we had the hypothesis, and we know that it was going to be important, but we really found that they work independently and they really provide information that text cannot really convey. We found that persuasion is more important than credibility and it's more important than informativeness, but for business-generated content, this latter reverses. Information is more important than credibility. And this is something that is because businesses are seen with a skepticism due to that commercial intent, and only the informational depth is what escapes this type of effect. And from a virality perspective, we found that relevance and the reviewer experience is what really matters across the board, and only in those hotels that are higher end or they're more popular, the content is really going to be king at making the decision of helpfulness. Not only that, we are providing strategies for management to increase the level of engagement. We said that users set the narrative, businesses should follow, and as a result, with that, you can really get a lot more engagement. And the time in which information is posted really matters, and it's going to really be an important point to raise the amount or the likelihood of going viral. I just want to conclude that by going beyond words, which is the title of this message, we're really fitting a narrative that is more objective, that is having more detail, and is allowing us to really understand how online helpfulness really works. Thank you for your time and looking forward to your questions.
Okay. Who wants to go first? Okay.
You want me to go first here? No problem. Oh, so I have a lot of questions. So basically, I mean, the first thing I wanted to say is that I find this work incredible. I think that there is a real possibility here for a very generalized approach to this problem, because, I mean, I don't know what kind of other applications you think of this methodology. I think I mean, do you have in mind?
So
general...
I think that there are definitely many places where we could try to apply this. So of course, we're applying in online review helpfulness because it's a more easier way to get the data. There's a lot of frame of work, but there's potentially a lot of work that it can be done, for example, in the real estate space, for example, that it can be applied. It could be applied to other cases of multimodality on, for example, research that is trying to find documentation that has text and images, trying to bring forward what is most important from the research, if it's the visuals, if it's the text. So I think that I would like to try to apply it first in those cases where information might be easier to reach. So for example, real estate could be a very good case, and the other one could be in the research space.
And so would you consider, also another question I have, which is important, I think, is, one thing that I didn't see, maybe you should do that in the future, is to think, because you can partition the variability here, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, one thing, an important partition is images versus text, because text is what you had before, right?
Right.
So can you evaluate somehow the contribution of image information? Because you said that they were more or less orthogonal, that there is no correlation. Mm-hmm. So it should be easy to do, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Do you mean in the question to try to separate the effects only for images and only for text?
To try to compare them, to see what is the contribution of images, what is the contribution?
Yes, so we had it was small, but it was in one of the findings that images provide more contribution than text in the analysis that we have done. When you aggregate the total information, is something like 70% of the information is contributed by images, where 30% is more on the text. But we don't want to generalize this idea because it could be driven by the type of information that we're providing. But on the first review, we found that type of information. We also found that the text alone, for those reviews that don't have images, the effects for text remain, meaning that relationship that we're finding on other types of reviews that don't have images, they still remain the same. So they should have really the same effects.
So that's good. So I have a few recommendations and questions also. I mean, one of them is basically that when you talk about the marginal, you mentioned that you know, you prefer, one of the reasons why you prefer the, you know, the
Negative binomial.
yeah, the negative binomial over the two-part model is that you can calculate marginal effects.
Mhm.
But in fact, I think none of the packages except ours
Right,
have marginal effects.
exactly.
So you could actually do the marginal effect.
Yep,
So
yep.
that's another point. Then another point is that basically you are using the Z-scores.
Mhm.
I recommend that you try in the future when you have time to look at using the Fisher-Yates transformation instead of Z-score, because they tend to, because the problem with Z-scores is that if the data is in a scale, if the numbers are all high, then you get the skewness to the left, the numbers are all low, you get skewness to the right. So in order to, that creates a problem when you do clustering, all these things gonna mess up. And if you use Fisher-Yates, even if you use Z-scores, right?
Right.
Because the shape doesn't change with the Z-scores. But if you use Fisher-Yates, it will modify the shape so that the shape look all the same. So that's a thing it will improve in your clustering and everything.
I think it's a good way to test it. The only thing just to mention is because the theory was using this deviation in the way that it was, I didn't want to modify the approach, but it's true that it could be improving the fitting for sure, especially for predicting purposes.
I think so. Then another issue is that your sample size are very big, you know. So the p-values also when you're going to publish this, I think one important point is that you recognize that the p-values are very significant. It's not necessarily due to the size of the effect, right? It's because if you have large samples, everything is significant, right? So one thing that you could do is to also add some kind of, you know, to consider the p-values together with the size of the effect, right? So that will be more clear.
Right.
Another issue
That can actually change some of the results.
So that's
significant.
Okay, but that should be a very nice way to present it, I think.
Yeah.
Also, another thing, just you know, another issue is the issue of phrase. I mean, you could extend this to phrase instead of words, right?
Yeah.
Have you thought about that?
Yes, no, of course. And using tokens as words instead of sentences has been analyzed in the literature. So some body of work has used, for example, 1 grams, bigrams, trigrams to compare what was the effect. And there's not a significant difference in using that approach, especially for the variables that we're converting here. We're using things like length or sentiment. Sentiment is better conveyed by the tokens themselves. So there's not a good use directly to really apply them, but we know that it could be something that it could be applied if we were operationalizing the information in a different way.
Okay, good. Now, something else, just about the definition of things. I mean, I read through this thing fairly thoroughly, so I'm happy to say that that I really enjoyed the dissertation. There's a few little things, like, for example, when you define your V for each hotel, right? So whether you should clarify that you are including, you said you include the phrases, all the words.
All the words from the hotel and the people.
And from the.
Correct. Yeah.
From the city, because
on the entropy.
clear. And
correct.
Also,
yes.
Another thing is notation again. Sorry for being so picky, but
no, it's fine.
When you do HML, you put the ML as a super index, and then when you define H0 and H1, you use your subindex, right?
Yeah. No, we're following a definition by Benz. So Benz is a standard. So we're talking about, just for context, on the entropy formulation that is done is a maximum likelihood entropy formulation done by Benz. We didn't want to alter it because it's the standard or the way that is being applied. I know that the subscript could be misleading, but it's the way that is shown on the literature.
I'm done. So,
Thank you.
Well, I'm not a methods geek like
Of course.
comments. First, I want to thank you for highlighting the updates. It's clear you listened to us at your proposal defense and you took all the feedback very, very seriously. And I want to thank you for that.
Thank you.
This is just a question for my own knowledge. The elaboration likelihood model is well established, you said, it's 50 years old. Are you one of the first ones to try to update?
No, so it's been applied in already in online review helpfulness. So there's work from one of the first times that we saw it on the application was by Luo et al. In 2013, if I'm not mistaken. And that was the first application that it was concentrating all the body of work into a specific they did. The approach was a little bit different because it was using survey instead of a quantitative approach of extracting the reviews. But they found that there was this significance. So we really try to start with that definition. And there's some other work that has been applying in the same way. The contribution that we make is really trying to incorporate textual and visual elements because it has only been referred as using textual elements and we didn't know how they were really interacting. So that's really the contribution to the application. It's a small step, but it's not that we're coming up with this from zero, let's say in this application for the first time. Build on the text, correct, yeah.
On slide 13, talk about content neutrality, image and text sentiment.
Mhm.
And I'm a little confused by your wording. You talked a lot about emotionally charged images. And you pointed out a cup of coffee. How was that when you were talking about emotionally charged, I was thinking about seeing somebody dead on the floors versus seeing a new baby.
Right,
You know, and then I see a cup of coffee and a spot on the rug.
that's a good point.
I don't know if that's the
Let
right
me-
word to
no, no, and-
understanding.
Absolutely. No, and thank you for bringing this up because I probably went super fast through it. So the way it works is we have what is called a pre-trained convolutional neural network. So basically the way that network is built is they have taken a lot of information from many images to set up what do they find as happy, sad, or shocking, and so on. So it is something that already exists. Now, the way that it's called the BGG19 is the architecture that we have used of the pre-trained network basically works relating pictures to labels as how they were really found. So for example, a picture that has a cup of coffee could be related to happiness because the labels that they have was from postings online that they were showing that I'm at the beach and I'm enjoying a cup of coffee. So the labels that they're created on that structure are relating that type of information with happiness. It is, if we applied it to the real world, like it is normally not likely that a person that is posting a cup of coffee is sad. It could be the context that you are sad, but from a regular trends perspective on when you're posting content, they're more related to happy places. Now, I must say, I don't know if the mappings per se, a cup of coffee is in all cases positive. It could vary by the lining of the imaging. But we know from the mappings that I was able to extract on the example, that a specific cup of coffee was related to a positive sentiment because the lining was positive. But the other things that the model is looking at is happy faces. So if there's presence of people that are happy, if the lining is actually more focused, if the lining is very light, so instead of a dark shot, or if the information or the picture is not blurry, those type of things, they contribute to the negative or positive score in the pre-trained network. Now, I don't really have a lot of time to explain it, but I'll be more than happy to go behind it. But it's based on the way that the pre-trained network has worked, and it's been applied on the same application has been done before. So I'm not creating anything new in this case. I'm just reapplying the approach from previous literature.
On slide 27, when you mapping virility, the TI-ELM framework, just a note, when you started your last section, you said, now I try to adapt the framework to what.
Not an adaptation. That's
Just-
fair. It's not an adaptation. It's more a mapping of the elements. Yes.
A common theoretical framework throughout all your
Yes.
work.
Correct.
Don't say, I'm gonna try to adapt this.
It's not an adaptation. It's a mapping. No, that's a very good point. Yes.
Say you're using, you're gonna use this framework to try to define,
Correct.
to develop your,
Yeah. No, chapter 3 is more of an adaptation because of that credibility element. But in the case of, virality, we're not really changing anything. We're just mapping the elements of dimension to the aspects that we already have on the framework.
Okay.
Thank you very much. No.
And then one final comment is, I agree. I think this is really interesting, really new, and I'm thinking of top marketing journal. But you really have to get more into the managerial implications.
Mhm.
I mean, you could even talk about how this could easily be applied to restaurants and other, other things where online reviews are so important, problems that managers
Right.
have and, how you can help them out. You really, 3 bullet points isn't enough.
Thank you. No, it's a good recommendation. Thank you. Should I open for Shanti and Lavini? Okay. I'm gonna open the microphone to Shanti first. Professor Shanti, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Thank you, Alvaro. I mean, I think I have to sort of second what Ellen and your previous dissertation
Javier?
members have said, Javier has said, that you have taken the comments seriously. And I also had the opportunity to listen to a lot of the changes that you had made a week ago. So I am convinced that, you've made significant progress since your proposal defense. So congratulations on that. I really only have 2 questions. And I think one question I somewhat had even in earlier. So I see the relevance of sort of user-generated and business-generated content and the usefulness. You started off saying that you're looking at experience products. Is the relevance of this is it only relevant for experience products or for regular products that you buy, like a camera, like an electronic item? Is the model sort of universally applicable, or is it particularly for experience products, a lot of what you have said makes sense?
No, it's a great question. The answer that I will give is that we don't know if it's applicable until we empirically find it. But what I can say from the theory is that helpfulness has lower importance on search products compared to experience products, because those attributes that I was mentioning at the beginning really reduce the uncertainty from the get-go. So people are going to be looking at the price and at those attributes. They may check the information on the reviews to confirm that those attributes exist and that the quality of the product, it is existing. So helpfulness in the literature, again, I have not tested directly in this model, has shown that the information on search products are less helpful on average, or the helpfulness matters less. And also the other thing is that it is less complex to apply. So it should be easy to create the same experiment that we have done for search products. And I think that that could be a very easy way to continue this research, especially for publication, is to try to understand how these dynamics will work in different types of products.
Including, for example, visual images. You think that they're more relevant for experience products than for search products?
Exactly, yes.
Okay. My second question was, I think I sort of asked this tangentially. You said that when the business generated content is more in keeping with the user generated, is more consistent with the user generated content, and it is seen as more credible, right?
Yeah, correct.
People tend to buy into the business generated content and take their information more seriously.
Correct. Yes, it's more credible, hence it has a spillover effect into the rest of what they say.
So from a managerial implication point of view, do you think businesses need to work? I mean, do you think that gives them guidance into the way they present their content, that they should in fact study user-generated content and then present their content in a way that is more consistent, work it backwards? Or is it that they present their content and if it appears consistent, in your estimation, what do you think works for businesses?
No, it's great. The answer is that I don't think from the literature that businesses are really understanding if they need to take an action. So maybe knowingly or unknowingly, they're posting content. And what we found from the result is that indeed, they need to listen to user-generated content in order to post their own content. So they really need to follow. The narrative is set by the user, or the way that you're being perceived is set by the user. The business should really follow and understand how are they being perceived, instead of trying to persuade the users about how they should be perceived. This is not the setting in which businesses should try to make convincing arguments, because they're going to be perceived in a much skeptical light. So indeed, from the results, I will say businesses should really follow what users are saying. And now they have an automatic way of really measuring this type of metric and seeing what is the overall effect on their engagement.
So in other words, you're saying a testimonial kind of content is what
Exactly right.
businesses should
Exactly right.
typically use in terms of how they want to project their product or product
I think that
experience.
exactly the application, I think it follows a similar cognitive process, right? When we're showing testimonials, we're basically saying, look, this is what people say about ourselves. It's not that I'm saying it, people are saying about ourselves. So with images is a similar nature, where we're posting content that is congruent with how users are seeing the information that we're being posted. So it's a way of testimonials, but in the way of applying images.
My last question, when in doing the study, what was the most surprising study? Because one of the things that I found was most of the relationships that you're looking at are positive, right? So what was the most counterintuitive finding that you found that you didn't expect it and said, wow, this is interesting and it's significant?
I like the question a lot, by the way. I hate it at the same time because I didn't think about it until now. But what I will say, Professor, is that if I reflect on the work, one of the things that I did not expect was on the business-generated content model. I was not expecting that due to this persuasion copying mechanisms, some aspects that were specifically related to persuasion were going to be inversely flipped. So they were going to flip negatively. The one that really stood out for me was that aesthetic quality, or the quality of the images. So one of the things on the user-generated content we found is that the better the quality of the image that is being provided, the more helpful it is because it contains more information, it's more aesthetically pleasing, and so on. For businesses, potentially driven by this level of skepticism, we're finding that it actually has a negative effect, because people are seeing as a persuasion mechanism to convince them that they should buy into their hotel. And as a result, they see it as actually a negative thing. I found that it's logical, but I did not expect that the effect was going to look this way. And then when you take into account that moderation, or that credibility interaction, you see that the sign goes back to positive, to the way that users will see their own content. So it is a very interesting dynamic that it is logical, but it's very shocking to see that it really comes so nicely, that you have a negative effect that is then flipped back to positive the moment that you're more credible, right?
Okay, thank you. And that's all. I don't have any more questions.
Thank you. I'm gonna unmute Professor Plavini in a second. 1 second. Professor Plavini, can you hear us?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. So first of all, congratulations. I can see your hard work over here, a lot of patience and a lot of hard work I can see. I have two basic questions. One is, you might have done it, I might have missed it. It's about the recency effect in your model, because there is an inherent bias when it comes to recency of reviews and its helpfulness. As a consumer, I might look at who visited a place recently and find its helpfulness more important than something which has happened 3-4 years ago. So I'm not sure you consider that or not in your future. If you want to work on this thing in future, you might consider that. My second question is, you looked at experience good, and I have no problem with that. It's interesting. But experience good they have different levels. Like hotels and restaurants are one thing, but it can be movie, it can be series on OTT platform, it can be books, where the pictures may not help. So how will you differentiate your findings for those types of experience goods?
That is a very good question. So it is true that one of the limitations of the work is that we're applying this in a very particular space. I think it was mentioned during the proposal that the limitation is we're using hotels that are in the US, so they have also a limitation of being extrapolate. You cannot really extrapolate it outside. And the other limitation is the type of experience product, because as you say, that type of products are very heterogeneous, and the role of images could be different. Now, this goes back to the question that Professor Cabrera has, which to me is, I think that we really need to take this work and extend it into other areas that could be helpful and that could find the similarities, to extend on the work on what places does it have a bigger effect, what spaces does it have less effect, because the dynamics are very different. We chose hotels, and I hope that I explain it correctly, because it was more challenging in terms of the
Yeah, that's
variety of
fine.
information. But it's true that it could be perfectly tried to be applied in a different field.
Good. Okay, one very common question, since you are almost at the end of your PhD life. If you would have lived this 6-7 years again, what would you have done differently?
Not a fair question.
I should ask my wife that is present here. No, this is actually something that I have reflected on a lot, right? Because I feel, and probably it's a common way of thinking, but I feel like I have touched every switch possible in my research with very little effectiveness, meaning I tried everything possible, and it was probably not the most effective way of usage of my time. Instead, I should have tried to be less ambitious from the beginning, trying to solve questions that were very specific so that I could really conduct the research in a more effective way. I feel like I wasted time on parts of the research that led nowhere, that wasted a lot of time. And that is the one thing that in the end, it cost me a lot of time. And that's why I'm here 5 years later, and I have sacrificed weekends not going to parties, because I was trying things that in the end may or may not work. But I think that if I could help or advise a new student in the future that is doing a doctorate, I would try to make sure that the very beginning, they have a very concise idea of what do they want to do and follow the plan. Because otherwise, yes, there's always going to be a process of bumping your head against the wall, but there's a better way of bumping your head against the wall to be more effective. That will be my point.
Good. And congratulations again, and good luck for your future.
Thank you, Professor.
Florida parties, it's very Spanish of you to be concerned.
I know, always.
Good incorporation of the relevant literature, and fleshing out the intro motivation, but also adding slides back
I don't know where that came from, right?
And also, it's like everyone said, good incorporation of suggestions and feedback. Are you doing something? Okay, I'm still not convinced about persuasion, but.
Okay.
We know. Did you look into any of the models?
Inside of the models report?
Any of the models I suggested for persuasion?
Yes, so we did the research on the persuasion models, and we try to apply it. The only limitation that we have is that that paper in particular is worried more about the way that people are being persuasive in a negative way, by cheating, by taking actions that are negative. Now, we actually use this a lot in explaining, for example, the deception mechanisms on chapter 3. So I used it probably not in the place that I expected that I was going to be using it. But yes, I think it was a good recommendation to try to understand how persuasion is being seen. The only problem there was it was a little bit more related to how persuasive aspects that are more deception for users.
Okay, so the content neutrality slide, you had the image sentiment, text sentiment, okay, and then you had just the measure of image at the bottom. So Do you think that the text sentiment, the way in which you measured that using a lexicon versus a CNN model, do you think it's comparable? Do you think it influences all?
So it could be, right? At the end of the day, let's remember, one is based on tokens that you can particularly map specifically to something that is happy. The other one is based on a pre-established architecture that you could or not be agreeing that that is actually something positive or negative. Now, the tokens could also be in some way ambiguous, right? So even though I'm saying like, I love this, or I could really put it in a context that it could be negative. So in a sense, there's always going to be some sort of ambiguity. I think that ambiguity is bigger on images because pixels by themselves don't say anything. Is there really the combination of specific, when they're put together, that they could be providing some sort of, sentiment. Now, it could be influencing that is more negatively charged or positively charged. I acknowledge that that is definitely going to be the case, but I think that no method is going to be exempt for that level of ambiguity, either on text or on images, is my perception. What's that? Of the images, you mean?
Well, so my notes are, would it make sense to make them more congruent? So you have the option of image text summarization, and then you could throw it to LIWC.
Yes.
Or, there's all kinds of pre-trained models that you could use for sentiment classification. The other thing is, you wouldn't have to do any, so like, just like to the image, you would get out a neutral. Could conceivably just apples to apples.
So one of the things in the early stages that we did for text, for image sentiment was we decomposed the images into objects, and then we're passing that as tokens to see if they were positive or negative. But how emotionally charged is a chair? How emotionally charged is a table or a bed? So we found that most of the sentiment, by just extracting objects from the image, were basically neutral. There was no effect. Unless you were finding somebody with a happy face, you were not really getting anything. So that's why we changed the strategy into going into this sentiment mappings, which have been developed more recently and applied to online reviews. So it's not the first time, I'm not the first one that is applying it, but I found that it was a more direct way of trying to measure this in relation, again, to labels or tags that, you could, again, agree or disagree that they might be emotional, but at least they have been tested against a data set that has framed them as positive or negative. So I think that I did an interaction. So for example, one of the things that I try to do was, okay, now that I have this information, if I have something that is emotionally charged in the text, what is the interaction between the text and the image? So for example, if I'm posting an image and I have something that is on the text highly emotionally charged, am I considering the image that is highly emotionally charged? Found no relationship. So interestingly, the fact that you could be saying like, I love this place, or I have whatever, there's no interaction in the model. The reason is probably because you don't analyze emotional aspect in the image alongside the text. You're not really making a whole of the whole emotional aspect together. You're either looking at the image and finding if the information that is being persuaded is effective and is evoking some sort of reaction. So I think that that's the reason why there's no interaction, and the model shows no interaction, is probably because the channels in which we're processing the information are separate.
The more so I meant just, did you kind of spot check, like if I put a picture of a chair, does it think it's positive?
Oh no, we did this, huh?
Okay.
We did. No. Sorry. No. This is great that I'm saying it. We, of course, one of the things that in the process, we sample images and we looked at the maps just to see if like it was making sense. Now, I can say that probably I spotted out of 100, a few that I was like, I don't know, this doesn't look very emotionally charged to me. But on average, I think it was really relating, especially what and maybe I have a personal bias in this case, but the way that I was seeing is related to social media postings when people are putting their pictures about being at the beach or being at the hotel. Those were related as emotionally charged, where I found, okay, I could relate or understand that this could be an emotionally charged picture because people are, having fun at the beach and maybe you're not seeing any faces. So that will be my response. I think it is not perfect, but I think it probably does a good job when I spot check if the work is okay.
So again, I love lexicon. I research in lexicon, but they, is a lexicon specific. So lexicons tend to, even though they usually, the dictionaries themselves have more negative words.
Right.
They tend to kind of overperform when it comes to the positive and not really capture the negative. So the way that you were calculating the frequency of positive, minus negative, etc.
So maybe let me see, tell me if I'm getting your question, because there might be a bias towards negative or positive, but we don't care. In this case, we don't care, because what we're trying to define is if the review is emotionally charged, either positive or negative. But what we're trying to understand is really separate neutrality from sentiment, which in this case.
The ones are not going to be well presented, and it depends on depends on the dictionary. So,
Okay.
So that's why I was just thinking that maybe, future research could get rid of the lexicon. Actually, LIWC, because it's also like software.
You know what it is.
pay for?
I pay for a month.
Oh.
It's okay.
But there's pretty good, I mean, you can even just do over it.
Yeah.
And it will be
Yeah.
real, so something to consider. And then I just have like one additional clarification. I made some comments in the actual text, but you're talking about sign flips and opposite sign. Do you mean the direction of the relationship by the LOR?
Yes.
Okay, just making sure. And also in the models, I believe you did, I'm just gonna double check. Consider the impact in multicollinearity.
Of course.
Okay. Cool.
Yes.
And then I think, so I concur with others that, now that you have all this, and now that I told you to take everything out and put in different chapters, so now we're gonna put it back. So we can send it along. But, focusing on that, why it's important, why businesses need this, how they can use it, and then kind of future areas of research.
Thank you.
Overall,
Thank you very much.
I'm going to make you solid lines.
Okay.
Jeez. Nice with that, but I want to go back to the sentiment. Just like.
Let me see if I can flip over. Almost there.
So if you hit a journal marketing, good journal in marketing, they are going to write off the bat, going to ask you about sentiment deviation. I know that you are trying to find like if there is a sentiment and emotional, but they are going to ask you these questions, especially if you are using text and measuring somehow using a lexicon, if you have tested sentiment deviation, there is a long tradition of marketing, a long lasting research in sentiment deviation, and like have you tested anything like that? Do you have an answer to that question?
We did.
So
four papers that we use for this actually on online reviews. I didn't mention, but they're at the bottom, right? So Chen Li, Cheng Xiong, and then one 2025. They have applied this approach of neutrality, and the deviation is really it is a mixed bag, right? Because some people say that you really need to try and understand if the message is really deviating significantly from the average, rather than just taking if something is emotionally charged or not emotionally charged. But in practical terms, the effects or the learnings that they're getting in most papers, they end up the same way. That neutrality in the end is what it differentiates one side versus the other. So taking this spectrum from negative to neutral to positive does not really provide a different type of modeling fitting compared to really putting it into a neutral to emotionally charged fitting. It is a decision. I'm not saying that it could be changed it could be perfectly changed. I think that for the idea that we're trying to convey, in this case of persuasion, I'm trying to really try to understand if the message is trying to have an emotionally charged element as a persuasive element, not so much about if the emotionally charged balance or on one side or the other is what is driving the effect. So it is a research choice. It's based on the body of work. I will agree that there could be pros and cons of using this approach.
Prefer to have an answer for that because
Mhm.
I can tell you that if you submit this to a journal, marketing journal, 2 out of 3 reviewers are going to ask
Mhm.
about how there is a huge literature on sentiment deviation and how the
Detailed
small
everyone
deviation is good,
said,
huge
yeah,
deviation
it's
is
that.
bad,
Exactly.
etc.
Yes.
So I concur with Dr. Hill. I think not the way that you explain it. I don't think that you didn't bring the importance of the two-side. You still need to convince us that that's that. I think it's a better measure of quality and persuasiveness, but because I know the literature.
For readability, you mean?
Specifically in the case of online reviews, these two-side.
Two-sidedness.
Literature,
Yeah.
I know that literature,
Mhm,
but I don't know, I don't really think that you convey that.
The message in
that
my
it
exposition.
is particularly important within this context.
Right.
And there is a huge literature. This is not the only measure
No,
of content quality. This is not the only measure of persuasiveness, but is one of the most, again, like
Is the most
in literature on this is something that
on this
actually
side, yeah.
increases a lot of if you
Yeah.
have these
Mhm.
kind of like counter arguments or two-side arguments. I don't think still you need to make a better effort convincing that. I mean, it is better, but
Yeah.
you have like readability. I think that this is actually a measure of quality.
Mhm.
But it's very contextual to online reviews and this kind of like,
Correct.
you still need to make that point
Stronger. No, it's true that it's a small like nugget there saying like unlike social media, but I agree that there's probably more to be explained because as you said, like it's very specific for online reviews because of the purpose of what people are searching in online reviews is specifically if the argument is detailed and objective, whereas on social media, this doesn't matter as much.
It's an argument related to, I mean, what is a better measure?
Mhm.
Because if you're trying to train some kind of like algorithm about something, messages that are very persuasive within a very specific context, like, I don't know, beachfront hotels.
Mhm.
You're going to train an algorithm about the ocean views that is completely useless for a hotel in, I don't know, Montana.
Mhm. Mhm.
So maybe you can make the argument, and that's my point, that probably there's no other better measure of
To be applied.
that goes
Mhm.
through elaborating or highlighting or finding messages that are very persuasive because they are very, very context
Context related. I
dependent.
agree. Yeah.
So maybe this is the best of the bad
Right.
solution, something like that, or maybe like highlighting this is text signal very important, very relevant in online reviews. This is like
Mhm.
I think so as a quality signal of another comment. I don't know if this is you also have questions about this. Text signal this is in that.
No.
So another comment, and also is kind of like a language. For the next chapter 3, you talk about behaviors, and you have to be very careful because you're not measuring behaviors. You don't know what people are going to do.
Mhm.
You know what the perceptions and how does the perceptions translate into helpfulness, votes, and that's the only kind of like behavior, quote unquote,
Mhm.
that you measure, like people
Clicking,
proactively pressing
engaging, right?
help, but you're not really measuring behaviors of what people are going to do.
No, of course, right.
And at some point you talk about what, be very careful with, you're not
Mhm.
measuring.
No, of
behavior.
course.
Can you show me the slide with the helpfulness?
On chapter 3?
Yeah.
Yes.
So can you repeat again the helpfulness and how helpfulness is connected here to BGC?
On the credibility side that we're changing?
Yeah.
So we're looking at two different aspects
So
of,
you were talking about like you cannot consider helpfulness vote for BBC.
Mhm. credibility.
But then you're connecting to user-generated content, and you are kind of like using the number of helpfulness and trying to mimic. Can you repeat
Sure.
that?
No. So the framework in itself remains the same. There's not difference in terms of, for example, how we're measuring informativeness, persuasion. But the one thing that one aspect that people are considering when they're reading the information is the credibility, right? So the adaptation, I shouldn't say adaptation because I think that's sort of the wrong word, but the changes that we're making or the refinements that we're doing in this type of model is that the credibility aspects need to change. It's no longer about the author that is saying the review. I don't care if I'm posting 1,000 posts about the hotel. I know that you're the hotel. You have an incentive to really post this type of information. So the credibility aspect is brought up by the identity, the brand equity of the brand, which is that second on the message that we have, and that similarity to business, to user-generated content. So that testimonials that we were talking about. The way that we're comparing it to user-generated content is, okay, we know that these variables on credibility, they cannot be compared, but for the other body of information, informativeness and persuasion, we can compare the effects and we can see, are they being on average marginally higher, lower, so on helpfulness. So if the relationship that we have
But that helpfulness is user-generated content.
Well, it's the engagement from the user that they're clicking on the review. So you have a post, right, from a business, and then that post can be, as you're passing images on the platform, you're gonna find a user-generated content image, and then the next one all of a sudden is a manager user. You can click on the helpfulness, you can find the information helpful right away from the business. So what I'm measuring is how is that
You have
helpfulness of the tool?
a helpfulness report
I do.
from the BGC.
Yes.
Okay, that's what I was.
Okay.
I didn't get that, and
Okay.
I was like freaking out with your result.
No.
If there is no such, if you are like, I was like, is he kind of like meaning the pattern?
Is the actual
I missed
engagement.
that. This is my last question. Did anybody before, and is that part probably was my mistake, use this mimicking process of virality on social media and stream helpfulness? I'm not saying that it's wrong or there's anything wrong with it.
No.
Is there any previous literature kind of like looking at these elements of virality inside online reviews? I'm not talking about like stream online reviews.
Yeah.
Helpful.
So I found very little literature applied to online reviews. I know that it was applied, for example, on search products.
Again, my concern is like what reviewers are going to think about.
Of course. No, and there was some applications on search products that was applied to virality. So why some products were really bringing a lot more attention than others. It was not applied to the hospitality aspect. So there could be some differences, but the way that they're really looking at it is very similar. So they're actually looking at time as a component that really builds a snowball effect and something that is more relevant as is brought up by algorithms. In Amazon, the effect is actually propelled more by the algorithms, because the moment that you're on a platform, you have another product that is pushed to you, and then all of a sudden you have a review that is that has a lot more reviews and is popping up more. So the effects are probably enhanced in those search products. In hospitality, nothing that I was able to find at all, but we were mimicking same approach of having this big level dimensions, and we were making sure that we were mapping it to our framework.
Reviewers are going to ask you, like, have you ever, like, there's a way to validate,
Mhm.
it's like transition from reality that you.
Yeah.
Is the foundation of.
Right. No, absolutely. I think that the transition, the way that I was actually transitioning is the references, like how has it been applied in a different aspect.
Thank you.
Awesome.
So now we need everybody that is not in the committee to leave the room, and we need to be able to communicate with.
Should I, the thing is that there are other people public in the audience. Should I kick them out? Okay.
Another.
Or have another room or Zoom?
Yeah.
I can put it on the, okay, it's a good point. All right, let me put everybody. Professor Shanti and Plavini, can you hear us? And, thank you so much, Professor Shanti and Plavini. And I see Jan and Bogdan. Guys, I'm a doctor now. I don't know if they can hear me, but I'm gonna open the muteness.
Vamos ya, doctor Alvaro.
Thank
Congratulations.
Thank you, brother. Thank you very much.
Very good, very good. We are very happy. Fede is also
Thank
happy
you.
here. He's listening as well.
Fede is the most important one. It's his dog. So thank you, guys.
Okay,
All
so
right.
now
Thank you, Bogdan. Thank you. Thank you.
go to celebrate.